long afternoon, right? Everybody's like had it. I will be very brief. It's nice to follow the robots. I got to catch Dada on the way out and tell him that the selfish gene, there he is, selfish gene died 2 weeks ago in a new book by Yale University Press, and you'll hear more about that in a minute. All right, so real quick, what is interspirituality and what's the interspiritual movement? So basically, it's anybody who figured out, and this is a lot of people by now, it's not that many 10 years ago, that at the heart of all the world's religions and spirituality, there's a common basis in the understanding of values and dreams and heart and ethics, that at the level of a heart-based spirituality, they hold all of that in common. And yet so odd, but not so odd, because we're freaky little hominids who are working out our monkey mind. All the religions have done for so long is not to put the emphasis on that, which is so self-evident, but to put the emphasis on the dogmas and the creeds and the things that please the mind and allay the fears, and not only compete and conflict about those things, but also go to war about them. So gradually what's been happening as a tipping point in evolution is it's been occurring across the world's religions that not only is that incorrect, but it also doesn't work. So globalization and multiculturalism, which is inevitable, you see it going on just by turning on your television, it's obviously pushing spirituality in the world's religions globally to go one or another of those two directions. And it's going to push religion either to becoming the type of thing like ISIS is, or something, let's say, in less violent societies would become more irrelevant, or it's going to push it toward the nuts and bolts of spirituality itself, and that would be the place that everyone identifies in the sense of being and action and doing at this level of heart and ethics and dreams and the shared thing that we would all love to see happen for humanity. So what's happening then is we have this unfolding then of desire of a universal spirituality that's based in the heart. And so going back to something Ruth said, a misunderstanding about interspirituality is that interspirituality, or this sinking into being the deepest type of spiritual, moral, and ethical person that we could be, can happen not only within every tradition and is mandated by the founders of all those traditions, but it can go on between traditions and outside traditions and among humanists and among non-theists and among maybe even robots, for all we know. Now, there was a time, I'll be really honest, there was a time when this idea was so new that it was far less self-evident than this appears in this room where everybody kind of gets this, so it's almost like a big duh. But originally, what has now become the interspiritual movement, which I'll tell you more about its structure worldwide, was really those of us who had worked personally with what we call the Big Five of Western monastics, who'd been a part of bringing the Eastern wisdoms west, and then eventually, of course, the North-South dialogue. And those five people, and you recognize most of them, Thomas Merton, Raymond Panikar, B. Griffiths, Wayne Teasdale, and Father Thomas Keating. And that was the first generation of people who were writing books that were saying that what a global future of religion was like was that kind of a vision, and that it was really that mandate that was calling the heart of humanity to set what the religion of the third millennium would be. And it actually led Wayne Teasdale to say in his book, which named interspirituality in 1999, he said the only viable religion for Homo sapiens in the third millennium is spirituality itself. That the only viable religion for humanity in the third millennium was spirituality itself. And that the work of unfolding what that would look like, and we're just, as Barbara was saying at lunch, we're just at the infancy of this, would be the unfolding of an interspiritual age that would find out what does it mean that we have all of these rich wisdom resources on the table from all of the great religions, the saints, the sages, the yogis, all of these cosmologies, all of these technologies, and these are all there to serve this amazing potential that we have as this hominid who's trying to move into the noosphere of Teilhard and into what our future is as an advanced, beyond hominid type of species. There's a famous letter that was written by one of those big five to then Cardinal Ratzinger, who was then Pope Benedict, who actually said, this is the call of where all the world religions should go. But he said he doubted that any of the great parochial religions, so tied up in money and dogma and creed, could ever easily take that route. And we've seen that dynamic. Though with the emergence of Pope Francis, it's very easy to see that we see this dynamic moving along. So really, really briefly, here's what's interesting. 10 years ago, if you would have Googled interspiritual or interspirituality, you would have seen nothing. The word did not exist. If you Google interspiritual or interspirituality today, you'll see between 100,000 and 200,000 entries, organizations, networks, and associations worldwide as this gestalt downloads. And I'll say more about that just in a moment. Now, it's during that period, in that 10 years, that Father Thomas Keating, who's the only one of those big five who's still alive, took the responsibility to kind of gather the families of all these people who were doing this work worldwide, invite us to the Trappist Abbey in Colorado 3 years in a row, and really make concrete plans for what it would take to serve unconditionally the emergence of what this paradigm would look like. And from that emerged a book in 2006 called The Common Heart. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that because sections of that have since been adopted by the UN. By the time we reached 2013, we had an international conference in Seattle that was called the Dawn of Interspirituality Conference. And it mandated the creation of a web platform where all of the groups that had been doing this separately worldwide, all the Lone Rangers that had been out of there applying this vision, would agree to have a common platform worldwide on which could arise, whatever would arise. And you can see that now, just as of a year ago, at interspirituality.com. And if you go there, you'll see that it really says it's there to engender this arising paradigm. If you go to the icon programs there, then you'll see all of the major people who were working separately up until about 2 years ago. In other words, we were all in touch, and we were all, in that sense, informally working for the same goal, but we didn't have a common platform. And the other thing that then emerged was this book, The Coming Interspiritual Age, which is from Eckhart Tolle's publishers, actually at Namaste. And we actually then laid out as a foundational book what were the broad possibilities for what this age could look like that could please, as Ruth says, those who want to go as deep as they possibly can to be the best Jewish person, the best Christian, the best Buddhist, the best Muslim, in the sense of love, service, activism, and what it also would mean to be entrepreneurs of new ways that spirituality can be done, where people practice maybe the technologies of 3 traditions, 5 traditions. Again, all seen as a global smorgasbord. So, moving on then toward the end, because I don't want to take too much time. I'm just going to back up a little. That's where we stand now. We have a global platform really now that can really serve whatever wants to arise. I'm going to back up just a little bit. If you go to www.thecominginterspiritualage.com, or if you go to isdna.org, the reason I mention it, the first thing you're going to see is 50 to 60 pictures of a lot of famous people, from Teilhard to Vivekananda to Aurobindo to Pythagoras, Kanemos. Now, these were people who got this idea even centuries ago. Point being that even in the axial age, when the world's religions were having their birth, there were major figures within the axial religions that were seeing the common thread that was already there. So there is actually a millennial tradition of interspiritual thinking before the idea of it really arose after World War II. Now, it arose after World War II because we emerged into a cosmopolitan world that was shattered by the experience of that amount of devastation. And it was asking at the level of international treaties and organizations and everything else, how can we do things differently than just beat up on each other? And so what emerged then was eventually what was called Vatican II. And for some reason, even though the Roman Catholic Church has been so parochial in so many of its ways, though every one of those big 5 that I mentioned to you was a Roman Catholic priest or monk, they actually opened this dialogue from Vatican II about what were the common foundations of the world's religions. Now, they got scared of it, and by the 70s and 80s, they shut it down. By that time, it was unstoppable. What happened was what was called then the foundationalist discussion. And the foundationalist discussion was theologians, spiritual leaders, and yogis, saints, sages, you name it, coming together and parsing out what was it really that the religions had in common. And they came up with 4 axial points. And these 4 axial points have really survived to become the tools that we can work with. Now, one is that there are basic teachings that are in common. The Golden Rule is the most common, and it's so self-evident what it means. 37 traditions have the Golden Rule. Underneath those teachings, no matter how they may phrase things, there are common consensus about values and ethics and how we treat each other that are held in common by every one of the, get it, 4,200 extant religions that are now on the planet. There are 4,200, 69,000 that have come and gone, 4,200 that are extant now. The third one was that if those agreements were true, then there was a common social mandate that was inherent and required of all the world religions in relation to economic justice and social justice. And so what's interesting is that when the Vatican came down on this discussion, one group that would not back down was the liberation theologians. The other group that would not back down was the ones that came up with point 4. And point 4 is the one that's gotten so much attention here at this conference, and that is unity consciousness. That if you inquire at the deepest level of heart and consciousness, and if you look historically at the greatest saints and sages that have inquired, what is it they discovered at the deepest depth of contemplative experience? Not some phantasmagoric religious experience, those may happen, but the experience that you are not separate, that nothing is separate, everything is profoundly interconnected, and that has profound implications on how we have to live together and how we treat each other. So even after the kibosh was put on that discussion, it survived anyway. From that, we then have what are called the 9 points of agreement, which came out of the Snowmass work, the 9 elements of universal religious behavior, 10 shifts that need to happen in human consciousness, 9 or 10 evolutionary shifts that we already see have taken place that point this direction, and 7 or 8 major points on universal education about what spirituality teaches character that are really agreed to by all. And that's actually what's called the Interspiritual Declaration. Now, you probably haven't heard of it because it only came out in this book 2 years ago. But in a recent UN document, which spoke of consensus statements that have been vetted worldwide about universal ethics and values, they picked 3. And I'm sure you've heard of 2 of the 3. You've heard of now the Interspiritual Declaration. The other 2 were the Charter for Compassion, and the other one was the Earth Charter. All right? So what's happened then is that we're at this point then of being poised from the religious sector of the world to be right in line with the type of vision that Barbara and here and everyone's talking about if there's a possibility that a new world could emerge. We've at least done our homework across the world's religions to be very well positioned there. So here's my last point. What's actually driving all this then? Why do we know that, for instance, I was pretty ill before I came down there and almost didn't come. Darn glad I did. But what keeps us in this game, no matter what? Here's what's pushing all this. Obviously, globalization and multiculturalism is pushing this issue. Those are inevitabilities. The question is, what is it going to look like and what's going to inform it? Just power, just politics, just money? Or is there a special role for the world's wisdom traditions in globalization that we have to move into and take responsibility for that? The second one, and this has gotten a huge amount of discussion here, is the emerging second-tier consciousness. That everywhere around the world, people are going boundaryless. The old boundaries and identities are falling away. What you needed to identify with to be safe, to say, oh, I'm black, I'm Jewish, I'm white, I'm gay, I'm straight, these are falling away en masse, and they're going to continue to fall away. Now what's influencing that look, when you look at brain-mind studies, is that our mind is going non-dual. Our mind is going toward being a natural parsing mechanism of seeing separation to starting to see interconnection. The studies at NYU and Yale and Athabasca and Harvard, they all show that the natural tendency now is for people to see interconnection first and separation second. So that's good news. Now, just two more things. Two of the things that I see coming out of this that I think are just really, again, they make us feel great. One is that the sense of interspirituality now, or say universal global spirituality, spiritual but not religious, multiple belonging, trans-traditional Christianity, trans-traditional religion, global-centric, or whatever, it has many, many names now. It is inseparable now from the sense of sacred earth. There is no conversation you can go to now on universal spirituality that it's not the same conversation as our sense of sacred earth, the sense of place. That place is absolutely important to who we are. The other is that the religions that have been so long held in very narrow end-time scenarios that are very often about the end of the world, now are starting to see that all you got to do is change that language a little bit in how you read the metaphors, and you get a constructive beginning of a new world eschatology. And if you take that route for your eschatology, it means it's already here. The question is now, what do we do together, right? Which is what we've talked about here. So that's what we're poised on. We're poised on a situation globally where the material, objective, scientific reductionist world has not worked and it's imploding, right? The only reaction of Homo sapiens, and I guess you know my other life is as an evolutionary biologist, 30 years of American Museum of Natural History, is that the only other thing that can happen is that our subjective nature, which Barbara would call our created nature, steps up and comes into that gap with a gigantic leap of creativity just in the nick of time. So this new book that just came out from Yale University Press 2 weeks ago basically shows, it's by David Sloan Wilson, who's a distinguished professor of this and that and co-wrote a book with Theo Wilson, so he has all the credentials that you need. The selfish gene was incorrect. The math was wrong, for one thing. But the altruistic selection, the selection of altruism by group selection is how nature works. So basically what that book is saying is that we need to completely change our visioning of how the natural world works because it has resulted from the selection of altruistic strategies, not the selection of selfish and greedy strategies. Now, if that's true for biological evolution, then it's even more hugely true for cultural evolution, because in cultural evolution, it's not based on reproduction and survival of the fittest way reproduction. It's about cognitive leaps. Cultural evolution can go very, very fast if there are cognitive leaps in positive directions. So what David Sloan Wilson is saying, and I'm putting Barbara in touch with him, and I've already put Ken Wilber in touch with him, and everybody and their dog, is there's no time to waste on this to allow science to rethink the implications that everything has been built on that kind of selection. So I'm going to quit with just one paragraph from one of Barbara's favorite people and one of my favorite people. And that is Sri Aurobindo's companion, the mother. And I think she said this in a way that's more beautiful than most of us could say it. And here we go. I always have trouble not cheering up on this, but maybe this is my day. All right. We are in a very special situation. Extremely special and without precedent. We are now witnessing the birth of a new world. It is very young, very weak, not in its essence, but in its outer manifestation. Not yet recognized, not even felt, even denied by the majority, but it is here. It is here, making an effort to grow, absolutely sure of the result. But the road to it is a completely new road, which has never before been traced out. Nobody has gone there. No one has done that. It is a beginning, and it is a universal beginning. So it is an absolutely unexpected and unpredictable adventure. There are people who love adventure, and these I call. And I tell them this: I invite you to the great adventure. It is not a question of repeating spiritually what others have done before us, for our adventure even begins beyond that. It is a question of a new creation, entirely new, with all the unforeseen events, all the risks, all the hazards that entails. It is a real adventure, and yet its goal is certain victory. But the road to it is unknown and must be traced out step by step in the unexplored. Something that has never been in this present universe in the same way and will never be again in the same way. Now, if that interests you, let us embark.